Hey, hey, hey. Time for the Out of This World story from rSpace. You know that old saying, eye for an eye? Today on rSpace, an OP decides to return the favor. My girlfriend had an affair with my high school best friend. I returned the favor with her sister and destroyed their relationship. I feel so betrayed right now, and by two of the people that I'd have least expected to hurt me that way. Before I, 24 male, had ever met my girlfriend, 23 female, I was friends with Dan. We'd known each other since high school, and when we were both awkward kids with no social skills, we hit it off and stuck together through it. We even kept in touch through college, even though he went to school out of state, while I went to school much closer to home. He was always like a brother to me. We went to each other first with good or bad news, and were always in the other's corner. If not for Dan, I would never have started dating Melissa. She and I met at a friend's party. She had an energy about her that drew me in. I was fine watching her from afar, but Dan pushed me to talk to her. We clicked instantly and eventually left the party to go get drinks somewhere else. We had a conversation and found out that we had a lot in common. I know it sounds like a cliche, but right then it seemed like we were made for each other. We met for a few more dates after that, and within 2 weeks, we were official. Dan was the first person I called with the news. He was genuinely happy for me, especially since I hadn't had the best luck with women. With Melissa, though, things were different. We were that annoying couple that was way too clingy with each other everywhere they went. We were inseparable, and when we were apart, we were always checking in on each other with phone calls and texts. Dan would often joke that I'd been whipped. Honestly, he was probably right. Looking back at it, it might have been a bit much. But hey, I was freshly in love. Dan would hang out with us at my place sometimes to watch movies and play games. Back then, I never noticed anything off between him and Melissa. I was happy that two of the most important people in my life got along so well. Sometimes Melissa would even suggest that we invite Dan over to watch a movie with us, or that we go out to grab drinks. I'd always happily agree. The three of us felt like the sort of close friend group that you'd see in a sitcom. Think Seinfeld or something. It was about 1.5 years into our relationship when I noticed things were getting a little strange. Melissa and I weren't spending as much time together as we used to. She'd cancel plans saying she was busy with work or too tired to go out with me. We weren't texting as much as we used to. I just assumed we were finally moving out of the very long honeymoon phase. Not fun, but it's a thing that happens to every couple. What was weird, though, was that Dan was acting strange, too. He was making up excuses about why he couldn't hang out. I didn't think much of it as well. I just thought that life was getting in the way for both of them, and it was a coincidence. Honestly, my mind didn't go anywhere else. I'd been busy a lot as well, though I still tried to make it the effort to reach out and hang out with them. I started to get suspicious when Melissa and I were making plans to watch a movie that Dan had been really hyped to see. I suggested to Melissa that we should all watch it together, and she didn't seem thrilled at the idea. She said we should watch it together, just the two of us, and I let her know that Dan would never forgive me if I watched it without him. I mentioned it had been ages since the three of us had hung out all together. I called up Dan and told him I was planning on watching the movie he was excited for, and he practically cheered. He said he was down to watch it. When I let him know that Melissa was coming, he got quiet and started on an excuse about how he wasn't sure he'd be able to make it after all. He said Melissa and I should watch it together, and he'd find another time to watch it on his own. Why don't we just wait until you're free and watch it together? That was my compromise, so us friends could get back together to have fun doing something. He said that he didn't want to get in the way of our date night and that we should have fun without him. Then he hung up. That was very strange. This was when the gears started turning. I'd been looking at their weird behavior unrelated, but seeing them both weird at the same time made me reconsider. If I didn't know any better, I'd say the two of them were actively avoiding each other. Unfortunately, I felt there were very few reasons why that might have been. I wonder how I would bring it up. It was a weird topic, but I had to make sure things were okay between the two of them. Is everything okay between you and Dan? When I said that, her head snapped toward me, which was all the confirmation I needed to know that I was on the right track. What do you mean? Everything's fine between us. I told her I realized that it's been a while since the three of us hung out together. Either you're busy, or he's busy, or you're both busy. Now she looked uncomfortable. I just knew I was getting closer to the truth at this point. She said we were all adults with busy schedules and that we couldn't hang out as much as we used to. She got defensive and said I was thinking like a child and needed to grow up and focus on more important things than dicking around with friends all the time. The sudden change felt off to me. I didn't know where all this was coming from. I decided to let it go, but the mood was already ruined, and she left shortly after that. I couldn't let it go altogether, though. Melissa was right that adults tended to drift apart as work and other responsibilities got in the way. But that wasn't what was happening here. Melissa and Dan used to be great friends, but now it seemed like they were doing their best not to run into each other. And Melissa had been extremely defensive. It wasn't like her. There was something unusual going on. Was there some bad blood going on between them? At this point, the idea of infidelity flashed in my mind, but having known Dan for so long and being that close to Melissa, I still didn't seriously entertain it. I decided I would talk to Dan instead. Melissa seemed to be touchy about it. Dan was a guy, and guys were more straightforward about this kind of thing. I figured I was sure to get a straight answer from him, and then we could figure out how to fix whatever was wrong between them. I didn't want anything to make us lose the friendship we had built, and I was sure Melissa didn't too, despite whatever she might have said earlier. The next day, I called Dan after work and asked if he'd be free to grab some drinks. He was hesitant for a second, but he eventually agreed when I let it drop that Melissa wouldn't be around. We met up at the bar where the three of us used to hang out, and it felt almost like old times. We talked about a bunch of random stuff first, sports, work, and girls that Dan liked. I wanted to ease into the real reason I'd invited him out, but I was also enjoying the conversation and catching up like we used to. But Dan was sort of guarded in some of his answers, like he was trying to keep the conversation away from certain topics. "Is everything cool between you and Melissa?" He looked up at me suddenly, and I was sure I saw panic in his eyes. Then he quickly laughed. "Yeah, man. Why do you ask?" I told him that I noticed how they didn't hang out anymore and were avoiding each other. I told him about how Melissa got defensive when I brought it up. Dan took a long sip of his beer, and it felt like he was stalling for time. "You're just imagining things. We're cool. You know how life is. People get busy." He was trying to play it off, and that annoyed me a bit. We were usually open with each other, and now he was being cagey. I have known him since high school, so it wasn't hard for me to tell when he was being shifty. It didn't help that the topic he was being so evasive about was my girlfriend. I told him, most assertively this time, to tell me what was going on. "I don't want to get in the middle of anything. If Melissa is acting weird, that's between the two of you, okay?" Now that was weird. It was extremely obvious at this point that Dan was being a defensive too, which was very unlike him. I got mad at this point. "Just talk to me. Why are you being so weird about it?" When Dan couldn't meet my eyes, the realization flashed across my mind. It sounded too stupid to believe, too stupid to even say. It's not that I hadn't considered it, but I had refused to even think it was a slight possibility. I decided to try and drop it as a joke and watch his reaction. "Are you sleeping with her?" Dan winced when I said that, and I felt like I'd been stabbed. I knew Dan better than anyone else, and that reaction might as well have been a nod and a thumbs up. "Dan, tell me you're kidding." "Talk to Melissa." Dan tried to stand up, but I put my hand on his shoulder and roughly forced him back into a seat. He still wouldn't meet my eyes. We sat there in silence for a while. I could feel the rage boiling behind my stomach. My best friend was sitting across from me, looking guilty as hell and confirming my worst suspicion without saying a word. I tightened my grip on his shoulder so he wouldn't feel my hand shaking. I shouted at him to say something to me. He just looked down at his drink. My heart was pounding. Not Dan. Not Melissa. The two of them? The two people I cared about the most? At that moment, I felt a wave of anger, and I wanted to hurt him the way he hurt me. I've never been a violent person, but before I knew it, I punched him, and he fell onto the floor. But he didn't fight back. He just looked ready to defend himself against another attack. "I'm sorry. It just happened." That made me angrier. You don't just happen to sleep with your best friend's girl. How long? He got up from the floor and finally faced me. He spoke quietly and admitted that it was a couple of months. "We got drunk one night, and it happened out of nowhere. Then it kept happening." Months. All this time they'd been screwing each other silly behind my back while I was trying to keep everyone together. All the evidence had been right in front of my face, and I'd ignored it. Maybe Melissa was right. I was thinking like a kid. I believed that just because these people were close to me, that they couldn't hurt me. That was very clearly stupidly wishful thinking. Now Dan wouldn't shut up. He was telling me that they knew it was wrong, that they knew they were hurting me, so they decided to put some distance between themselves. Maybe he thought it would make things better, but it just pissed me off. My relationship was falling apart, while these two found it impossible to keep their hands off each other? Writing about it is pissing me off again. Do you know how ridiculous it is to say that? I turned around to storm outside, and Dan put his hand on my shoulder. It took all I had not to punch him again, so I just shook him off instead. Outside, I walked for a while without thinking of where I was going. I wasn't thinking straight after all. After a while, I stopped walking and decided to confirm with Melissa. I didn't know what I would say when I saw her, or what I would do, but I knew I had to face her. I didn't think of what I would do if she confirmed what Dan had said, and looking back, that was dangerous, because my emotions felt very volatile. I didn't bother calling to check if she was home. I didn't call an Uber either. I just turned and started walking in her direction. I needed some time to think, and the cool night air helped. I went home and I texted Melissa to come over, and said it was urgent. It took her 30 minutes to get to my place, but my anger hadn't cooled a bit. When I opened the door for her, I shrugged off her kiss, pulled her inside, and slammed the door behind us. "What's the matter with you?" I told her I knew about her and Dan. She crossed her arms and stared defiantly. "Know about what? What are you talking about?" She was still playing dumb, and that was pissing me off. I let her know that he had told me everything. Her arms fell to her sides, and she lowered her gaze. There was guilt all over her face. That was all the confirmation I needed. That was when she got all apologetic. "Babe, I'm so sorry. It was never supposed to happen. It was a stupid mistake that just kept happening somehow." There it was again. It just kept happening. How could it just keep happening? I had the feeling they were using that phrase because they both didn't want to call it what it was. They were having an affair. It was simple as that. Why did they keep trying to minimize it? When was the last time? She looked unsure of what to say. I'm sure she was trying to figure out what lie would be the most acceptable and to figure out what Dan most likely would have said. Remember, Dan already told me everything. I lied. He hadn't mentioned that, and I hadn't asked, but I wanted to pressure her into the truth. "Last week, but we hadn't done anything for 3 weeks before that." Yeah, that part stung hard. She couldn't convince me that she regretted it if they slept together just a week ago. I clapped sarcastically. They really couldn't stop themselves. "I can't believe you would do this. I can't believe he would too. He was like a brother to me." She rolled her eyes a bit and said, "I mean, he's not really your brother." I can never forget that. That pissed me off. Was that supposed to make it okay? I asked her that, and she said, "I just mean that you're trying to make it sound worse than it is." Man. I let her know that it didn't need my help to sound bad. It was already extremely bad. "He's not actually your brother, that's all I'm saying." That was her stupid retort. I heard stories of women suddenly getting defensive after being caught, but I never thought I'd have to experience that kind of irrationality. We fought over this for a few minutes. She started calling me childish again, and I knew she was deflecting. I didn't let her, and we kept going back and forth for a while. I was shaken with rage after a few minutes. She had betrayed me so deeply, and she was still trying to pin the blame on me. She refused to take accountability, and it angered me so much that I had to start moving before I did something stupid. I was shaking with rage and ready to put my fist through a wall. Instead, I stomped around the apartment, picking up everything she owned and tossing it into a rough pile in the living room. She followed me the whole time, pleading now. Apparently, I didn't take the simp route she had hoped for. It was too late for an apology now. Once all her stuff was in a pile, I told her to pick it up and get out, or I'd throw it out the door myself. She refused for a while and kept begging. I got tired of hearing her voice. Suddenly, the voice I'd loved was grating to me. I picked up her stuff and walked to the door, and she moved to get it from me. I sidestepped her, opened the door, and threw all her things into the hallway. When she went out after it, I slammed the door and locked it behind her. She knocked on the door, calling my name for a few minutes after that, but I didn't answer her. I spent some time getting myself together. I cried for a bit, had a few beers, and now I'm here sharing my story. I don't know how to move on from this. I don't have anyone else. I just had the two of them. Now Melissa came into my life and took the only person I'd had apart from her. It hurts a lot, but I don't want to wallow. I'll pick my pieces up eventually. But first, I want to think of a way to really make her pay. OP, I know you're feeling betrayed, but I think we both missed the part where it just happened became the excuse of the century for affairs. Honestly, at this point, I'm convinced Dan has been planning this since high school. Maybe all those years of bad luck with women was him just waiting to swoop in and snag yours. Now, I'm not saying this is all Dan's fault. Melissa is obviously no better. He's not your brother. Yeah, thanks. Tips. Update. I'm the guy whose girlfriend cheated on him with his best friend. I was in a bad place after the incident, but a lot of the comments helped me out. I think I might even have a couple of friends from the people who came to my DMs. Thanks to everybody for the support. You really helped me pull through. A popular opinion was that I should just forget about the two of them, but I couldn't. I wasn't going to leave them to have a happy life together after what they did to me. I wanted to do something that would ruin whatever they had budding between them. Because, let's face it, once I was out of the picture, they'd go right back to smashing every chance they got. I knew that I wouldn't be able to control that reality, but at least I wanted to make sure I felt better if it was happening. One of you gave me the idea I eventually went with. I think it was a joke, but it sounded like poetic justice to me. Now you have to sleep with her sister. Fair is fair. I couldn't get the idea out of my head. It just so happens that Melissa does have a sister, Claire. I didn't know Claire very well. We'd met a few times and she really seemed to like me. I liked her as well, though I'd never had any feelings towards her, even though she looked like a younger, slightly prettier version of her sister. For one thing, I'm not a cheating piece of crap like Melissa. But times had changed. I wasn't with Melissa anymore, and this was war now. The plan wasn't really to sleep with Claire. For starters, I don't think I'm enough of a stud to bag any girl on demand. The game was simply to make out with her, or even just attempt to kiss her. I just wanted her sister to know that I'd made a move on her sister. I wanted her to taste a fraction of what that kind of pain felt like. So I called Claire and started fake sobbing to her about my breakup. I told her how much it hurt me and asked if I'd be able to come over and talk about it. Claire invited me over right away. She was sympathetic, listening the whole time. I didn't mention the cheating. I just cried about how she was perfect for me, how heartbroken I was, and how I had really thought that we would end up married. I laid it on thick, sobbing about how I was lost. Claire listened attentively, comforting me with soft words, and she even gave me a hug when I let a few tears fall. I could see Claire softening up, and I knew it would soon be time to make my move. She was sitting beside me with one of her hands on mine. She was misty-eyed too. I made myself look vulnerable, looking into her eyes with a hurt expression. I don't know how to go on. I wish I could move on, but it's too hard. Being here with you helps, though. You're a good person, Claire. Better than Melissa. She smiled softly, and I could see that she was falling for the act. I leaned in and kissed her, and to my surprise, she didn't pull away. She didn't kiss me back right away, but she eventually did. I assumed that was her weighing the situation, and the scales eventually fell my way. After that, things got a little hot and heavy. We didn't go all the way, though. Eventually, she pulled back, flustered, and said, "What are we doing?" I apologized to her and said I had gotten overwhelmed. I left as soon as my clothes were straightened out. I was already dialing Melissa before I was out the door, and I told her to meet me at my place for a final talk. Melissa was waiting outside my door before I got back to my place. "First of all, I just wanted to say I was sorry. I didn't handle this well. I know I hurt." I cut her off because I didn't want her to apologize. There was no room for that anymore, and I didn't want the slightest possibility that she'd make me feel any pity for her. "It's fine. I'll forgive you for sleeping with Dan if you can forgive me." She was looking at me warily. "What did you do?" I kissed Claire. Actually, I did more than that. I made out with her. Melissa exploded. She screamed, cried, and called me every name in the book. She called me a monster and grabbed me by the shirt. She looked like she had lost her mind. I shook her hands loose and stepped back. "How does that feel?" "I figure you can accidentally sleep with my best friend multiple times, then I can accidentally make out with your sister at least once." Melissa had no response to that. She just stood there ugly crying. "I want you to know that you brought this all on yourself. You didn't appreciate what you did to me, just how bad you hurt me. So I had to let you know what it felt like." I felt great. I'd gotten under her skin. I'd shown her what she'd done to me. Maybe it was petty, but it felt incredibly good. I didn't need to be the bigger man. I just wanted to win. And I had. After that revelation, I got a few texts from Dan. He attacked me for going after Claire, and I reminded him that he had no moral leg to stand on. After that, he stopped trying to berate me and just updated me on Melissa and Claire. He said he and Melissa had stopped seeing each other. She blamed him in part for what I had done with his sister. He also said Melissa often brought me up when they texted and talked about how much she regretted what she did. She and Claire weren't talking to each other much, and Claire hadn't contacted me at all. Dan asked me if there was still any chance that the two of us could be friends, and I told him point blank that I could never trust him again. I let him know outright that the only reason I was still talking to him was because I enjoyed hearing how much Melissa was hurting. He'd only replied to that with a, "Wow, okay," and I haven't heard from him since. And honestly, I'm glad to be rid of both of them. I've already started to move on, and I'll forget them one day, but I made dang sure that they won't forget me, and I think that is soothing. I'm not gonna lie, OP, your approach is pretty wild, but you got the outcome you wanted, which is some closure for yourself and the satisfaction of seeing them experience a fraction of what they put you through. Hey, you did what you felt you needed to do, and now you know where everyone stands. Now it's just about making sure that you leave this hot mess behind for good and start building something better for yourself. What would you have done? Thank you for joining us today on rSpace. Be sure to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on our next video. See you next time.